At 9:12 on Monday morning, my brother offered me $10 million to sign away our father's vote. At noon, the board of Grant Urban Holdings would decide whether to sell the company our father had spent 40 years building. The deal would pay the banks, protect most of our 6,000 employees, and leave Nathan rich enough to stop pretending money mattered to him. It would also allow the buyer to raise rents across 23,000 apartments. Nathan placed a pen beside my hand, take the money, transfer the vote, and walk away. Behind him, through the hospital calf windows, our father lay unconscious in intensive care. Elias Grant had survived recessions, lawsuits, 2 divorces, and 1 helicopter landing that nearly removed the roof of a hotel he owned. A stroke had silenced him in less than 30 seconds. I looked down at the agreement. You offered $10 million very quickly. We do not have time to negotiate. That is what people say when they are afraid the other person might read the contract. Nathan's jaw tightened. You are not qualified to control a $900 million company. I have worked there for 7 years. You run the division father created so you could feel useful. I folded the first page over the signature line. And yet here you are. His eyes flicked toward the intensive care unit. At noon, 6,000 people may lose their jobs because the homeless girl father adopted decides she wants revenge. 15 years earlier, Elias Grant stopped a demolition because a 9-year-old girl refused to leave the 5th floor. That girl was me. The building his company was preparing to destroy had officially been declared empty. I was still inside it. My mother and I had lived in apartment 5C on Calder Street until she died. Afterward, Mrs. Alvarez from the apartment next door began bringing me food and telling social workers she had not seen me. She was not trying to keep me hidden forever. She was trying to keep me close to the last place where my mother's coat still hung behind the bedroom door. Grant Urban wanted the block cleared for luxury apartments. According to the company, every tenant had accepted relocation money and moved. My mother's signature appeared on one of the relocation forms. It was dated 3 months after her funeral. On demolition morning, television crews surrounded Elias Grant as he stood beside a red ceremonial button. A councilman spoke about progress. A banner showed the glass tower that would replace our building. Mrs. Alvarez had gone downstairs to argue with security when I heard the countdown begin. I climbed onto the fire escape. By the time Elias reached 3, I was standing behind a 5th-floor window with my mother's relocation notice pressed against the glass. Someone screamed. Elias looked up, saw me, and pulled his hand away from the button. The photograph appeared everywhere the next morning. Billionaire saves homeless child. Developer halts demolition seconds before tragedy. Elias stood beside my hospital bed in one picture, his hand resting on my shoulder while I stared at the photographer. I hated that picture. I hated the clean clothes they had put me in. I hated the way reporters called him my rescuer when his company had nearly buried me under 5 floors of concrete. Elias arranged foster care, school fees, counseling, and a dozen interviews I refused to give. For months, I assumed I was another crisis he had assigned to employees. Then, I ran away. It happened during Nathan's 17th birthday dinner. A girl at school had called me Elias Grant's publicity orphan, and by evening I had decided she was right. I returned to Calder Street during a snowstorm and climbed through a broken ground floor window. Nathan told me, years later, what happened at the restaurant. The birthday cake had just arrived when a social worker called. Elias stood before anyone lit the candles. Nathan said, "She has teachers. Let them handle it." Elias picked up his coat. She asked for me. He left his son beside an untouched birthday cake and searched the neighborhood himself. He found me sitting on the floor of apartment 5C beside my mother's sewing machine. Snow had blown through the broken window and gathered along the wall. There were no reporters, no assistants, no cameras waiting outside. Elias removed his coat and sat beside me. After nearly an hour, he said, "I don't know how to make you trust me." I kept looking at the sewing machine. "You could start by being quiet." He nodded. We stayed there until the snow stopped. Elias became my legal guardian that spring. He adopted me the following year. The newspapers called it extraordinary compassion. Nathan called it another family decision announced after the press release had already been written. 15 years later, I ran Grant Urban's smallest division. Renewal Homes repaired old apartment buildings after the profitable development teams stopped caring about them. We replaced broken heating systems, removed mold, negotiated repayment plans, and kept families inside buildings other executives wanted to empty. Elias gave me the division when I was 21. "You understand these properties," he said. "What you mean is nobody important wants them." He smiled. That too. I expanded Renewal Homes from 8 buildings to 34. 3 years earlier, I started a pilot program that gave tenants and maintenance workers a small ownership share in the buildings they helped stabilize. Repairs improved. Missed rent fell. Fewer families moved. Elias praised the results in private and refused to expand the program. "Every property transferred into a trust lowers Grant Urban's value," he said. "It still has value. It no longer belongs entirely to us. That is not the same thing. To investors, it is close enough." He promised we would discuss it after the next refinancing. Elias had his own version of after the next deal. Nathan ran almost everything else. He knew every lender, every contractor, and every project that was late before the project managers admitted it. Employees feared him, but they also called him when a pipe burst at 4 in the morning because Nathan answered. 3 years earlier, he pushed Grant Urban into buying a chain of luxury hotels. The purchase itself was not foolish. The timing was. Interest costs rose. Bookings fell. The hotels began draining money from the housing business. Elias removed Nathan as emergency trustee of the family's controlling shares because Nathan's personal guarantees created a conflict with the banks. He named me instead. Nathan knew about the change. They had argued about it in Elias's office for 2 hours. Nathan expected our father to reverse it once the hotels recovered. The hotels never recovered. At 7:30 that Monday morning, Elias suffered a stroke while preparing for the takeover vote. The voting trust activated when the doctors declared him unable to act. For the first time in the company's history, Nathan could not move without my approval. He sat across from me in the hospital calf and pushed the pen closer. "The buyer assumes the debt and pays $640 million in cash. What happens to the protected leases? Alder Peak honors them for 18 months. And after 18 months, they review each building. They raise the rents. They run the buildings properly. People are not maintenance expenses." Nathan leaned forward. "Payroll lasts 22 days if this sale fails. You have told the banks that? They know. The employees? They know enough." I slid the agreement back to him. No, he did not touch it. "This is not Calder Street." "No. It is 23,000 Calder Streets." Nathan looked toward our father's room. "Do you know what he used to say about you?" I waited. "He said you were the only person in the family who still believed buildings belonged to the people inside them." That sounds like him. He never said things like that about me. Nathan's thumb pressed against the edge of the table. "Is that why you hate me?" "I don't hate you. You offered me money to disappear." "That is business." "What was the birthday cake?" His eyes lifted. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, Nathan gathered the agreement and put it back into his briefcase. He knew how to come when you called. He left before I could answer. The board delayed the vote for 48 hours. The banks agreed not to act until then. That afternoon, Victoria Shaw arrived at Grant Urban's headquarters. Victoria was the chief executive of Alder Peak, the company offering to buy us. She wore a dark suit, carried no visible notes, and did not pretend her proposal was generous. "We preserve the operating company," she said. "That requires keeping the parts that make money and selling the parts that do not.
Claro.
Some housing properties will be sold,
Coca-Cola
others will need new
después.
lease terms." "You mean higher rents?" "I mean rents that cover debt, repairs, taxes, and insurance." "What happens to the pension plan?" "It freezes at closing. Existing balances remain." "And renewal homes?" "Some of it remains." "How much?" "Approximately 400 positions overlap with ours. 400 people." Victoria watched me absorb the number. "You can reject our offer," she said, "but do not confuse refusal with preservation. If the banks seize the company, they will cut faster than I will." She closed the folder in front of her. "Your father made promises when money was cheaper. I cannot purchase those promises at their original price." After she left, I drove to Calder Street. The old building had survived because Elias stopped the demolition, but Grant Urban never restored it. A chain-link fence surrounded the entrance. Weeds had grown through the steps. Mrs. Alvarez was waiting outside with 8 former tenants. She was 78 and walked with a metal cane. The key to apartment 5B still hung from a red string around her neck. "You invited everyone," I said. "They heard the company might be sold." A man named Thomas led us through a gap in the fence. Inside, the lobby smelled of wet concrete and rust. Mrs. Alvarez sat on the remains of the old reception desk. One woman remembered Grant Urban cutting the heat during winter. Another said workers removed her front door before her children had finished packing. Thomas pointed toward the staircase. "They stopped fixing the elevators first. Then the lights. Then the water pressure. By the time they offered relocation money, people were begging to leave." "Did Elias know?" I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Mrs. Alvarez rested both hands on her cane. "He came here," she said. "When?" 2 years after he adopted you." The lobby seemed to grow quieter. What did he want? To know which families would accept compensation. Compensation for what? For the false vacancy records, for the heat, for the doors. A man near the stairs laughed under his breath. Mrs. Alvarez continued. "He said the managers responsible were gone. He said Grant Urban had stopped the practice. Did he ask you not to speak publicly?" "He said an investigation could close the company." "That is not an answer. It was his." I looked at the old key around her neck. "Why didn't you tell me? You were 11. You had started calling him Dad." She reached up and touched my cheek. "He loved you, Maya. Do not use that to make him innocent." That evening, I found Nathan in Elias's office. He stood behind our father's desk, reading lender reports. His jacket was off and his sleeves were rolled to the elbows. I closed the door behind me. "You knew about Calder Street." He did not look up. "Which part?" "The false vacancies." Nathan set the report down. "I knew there had been illegal clearances." "When?" "After I joined the company." "And you said nothing." 3 executives were fired. Families were compensated. The practice stopped. "Privately, yes. Why?" Nathan walked to the window, because disclosure would have triggered investigations across the entire housing portfolio. That is usually what investigations are for. And if the banks had frozen us? If thousands of employees had lost their jobs? "You sound like him." He turned. "You think that is an insult. It is also why there is still a company for you to judge." I moved closer to the desk. "Did you tell him to hide it?" Nathan's expression changed, but only slightly. "I was 22. That was not my question." He asked me what I thought would happen if we disclosed everything. "What did you say?" "That the banks would leave." And I was right. I stared at him. Nathan picked up the lender report again. "Do not look at me like I built Calder Street." "No, you just helped bury it." He slammed the report onto the desk. "You want him to have been innocent because he loved you." I wanted him to be guilty, because then I could explain why he became a father for you and not for me. The room went still. Nathan looked away first. Neither of us gets what we want. The doctors allowed me into Elias's room the next morning. He was awake, but could not speak. His eyes followed me as I pulled a chair beside the bed. I placed an old photograph of Calder Street on the blanket. Did you know about the false vacancies when you adopted me? He shook his head. I believed him. Did you learn later? His eyes closed. I placed a letterboard beneath his hand. It took him nearly a minute to select 3 letters. Y-E-S. His fingers moved again. I lifted the board away. No, you had 11 years. A tear moved into the gray hair beside his ear. I put the photograph back into my bag and stood. His fingers struck the blanket twice as I reached the door. I stopped, but I did not turn around. That night, I returned to Renewal Homes. 3 people from the tenant ownership pilot were waiting in the basement conference room: our finance director, a maintenance supervisor, and a tenant representative named Keisha Bell. We had spent 4 years proving the model worked on 6 buildings. We had never tried to apply it to an entire housing portfolio. By 3 in the morning, the whiteboard was covered with numbers. We would sell the hotel chain and 2 unfinished towers. The proceeds would reduce the debt. Grant Urban's housing division would become a controlled public benefit company, with tenants and employees receiving 30% ownership over 5 years. The Grant family's voting trust would retain control, but independent directors would hold veto power over mass evictions, rent increases, and property sales. Executive bonuses would disappear. 600 positions would still be cut, with enhanced severance and 18 months of health coverage. The company's value would fall. It would survive. Keisha looked at the final page. Who controls the voting trust? I do. For how long? Until the board and trust beneficiaries replace me. The finance director removed his glasses. Nathan will never accept the personal guarantee. He might. You just accused him of helping hide Calder Street. I did. And now you want him to risk everything he owns? Yes, Keisha leaned back. You two have a strange family. You noticed. At 11:45 the next morning, the boardroom was full. Victoria sat at one end with Alder Peak's attorneys. Nathan sat opposite her. Our father's chair remained empty between us. Victoria presented first. She explained the sale without hiding the cuts. When she finished, the lead director turned toward me. As emergency trustee, you control the Grant family vote. Do you approve the Alder Peak transaction? No. Several directors began speaking at once. I placed my restructuring proposal on the table. There is another option. Victoria opened it. You are not selling the housing division. No. Then our offer is withdrawn. That is your decision. Nathan began reading the financial pages. You are selling the hotels at a discount. Yes, and the 2 towers. Yes, this leaves more than $200 million in debt. 212. You are giving tenants and employees 30% of the housing company. Over 5 years. Who controls the remaining shares? The Grant Voting Trust. Nathan looked up. You? Yes, the room grew quiet. For how long? Until I decide someone else can protect it. Victoria closed the proposal. The lenders require Mr. Grant to maintain his personal guarantee. Nathan turned to me. You kept that part. The plan does not work without it. If I sign, my shares and personal assets remain pledged for 3 years. Yes, and you sit above me controlling the trust. Yes, what exactly do I receive? I slid the leadership page toward him. His name appeared as Chief Operating Officer, reporting to an independent board and to me as Executive Chair. Nathan read it twice. You want me to stay. You know the company. You spent 2 days accusing me of protecting father. You did protect him, and now you trust me with operations? No. A director coughed into his hand. I pointed to the oversight provisions. I trust these. Nathan looked at the empty chair between us. Victoria spoke quietly. Our sale releases your guarantee at closing. You walk out of this room protected. I know. If you support her plan, you risk your personal assets to preserve buildings your family no longer fully owns. Nathan closed the proposal. The lead director asked, "Before we proceed, Alder Peak has raised a question about undisclosed housing liabilities. Mr. Grant, did your father ever tell you senior management falsified vacancy records?" Nathan remained still. Victoria's attorney leaned forward. "This company is being valued today. Rumor is not liability." "Did Elias Grant tell you?" Nathan looked at me. Then he looked toward the directors. "Yes," one board member dropped his pen. "When?" Victoria asked. 9 years ago. What did he do?" "He fired 3 executives. He compensated some families. Did he disclose the scheme?" "No, why not?" Nathan's hand tightened around the pen. "Because I told him not to." The room went silent. Victoria's expression did not change, but her attorneys began speaking to one another. Nathan continued before anyone asked another question. "I told him the banks would treat the entire housing portfolio as contaminated. I told him we could repair the damage privately." He looked at me. I was wrong about the repair. Then he turned to the signature page of my proposal. "If I sign this, you control the company. Yes, you could remove me next month. Yes, you could sell my shares. No, the trust cannot do that without beneficiary approval." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You read everything. I learned from the offer you brought to the hospital." Nathan uncapped our father's pen and signed the guarantee. He pushed the proposal toward the lender. "Call the vote." The restructuring passed by 2 votes. Alder Peak withdrew its offer before the meeting ended. By the end of the month, Grant Urban had sold the hotel chain and both towers. 600 employees lost their jobs, but every one received severance and extended health coverage. The remaining company was worth less than $900 million. It was still ours. Nathan became chief operating officer. I became executive chair and permanent trustee of the family's controlling vote. At our first board meeting, Nathan arrived 5 minutes early and sat in the chair to my right. Elias's old chair remained at the head of the table. Nathan looked at it, then at me. "Are you keeping that? The chair? The company?" Directors began entering behind him. I placed my folder on the table. "Yes," he pulled the chair out. "Try not to ruin it." I sat. "Try not to make me fire you." Nathan took his seat beside me. 6 months later, Elias attended the reopening of Calder Street in a wheelchair. The old building had been too damaged to save. In its place stood 86 apartments owned by Grant Urban's new housing company. Tenants held shares. Maintenance workers held shares. The Grant Trust still held control, but no mass eviction could happen without independent approval. A stone wall near the entrance carried the names of families displaced from the original building. My mother's name appeared halfway down. Mrs. Alvarez stood beside me with the old key hanging around her neck. Nathan pushed Elias's wheelchair toward the wall. A reporter waited near the entrance. I had not invited her. Elias had. He lifted a microphone with both hands. His speech was still slow, each word arriving with effort. "I knew," he said. The reporter stepped closer. Elias looked at the names on the wall. "I knew later. I hid it." Nathan's hands remained on the wheelchair. Elias continued. "I thought money could fix what silence protected." He stopped to breathe. I was wrong. No one applauded. The reporter asked whether Grant Urban would compensate the remaining families. I answered, "Yes. The board approved the program yesterday." Elias looked up at me. "Home?" he asked. Behind him, residents were receiving keys. Children ran through the entrance while volunteers carried boxes toward the elevators. I looked at the open doors. Not yet. Mrs. Alvarez took my arm, and we walked inside for the first tenant meeting. Nathan remained with Elias for a moment. Then he pushed our father toward the entrance. At 9:12 on Monday morning, my brother offered me $10 million to surrender our father's empire. At noon on Wednesday, he helped me keep it. Not the way Elias built it, the way we were finally willing to answer for it. When the next Grant Urban Board meeting began, I sat at the head of the table with a controlling vote in front of me. No one called me the homeless girl Elias Grant adopted out of pity. They waited for my decision.